The lights in the great hall dimmed as Ambassador HFY stepped up to the speaking platform, and her voice carried across the vast chamber, where representatives from 200 worlds sat waiting for the annual report that everyone expected to be the same as it had been for the past 312 years, and she looked out at the sea of different faces and forms that made up the Galactic Federation Council and began to speak in the calm tone that had made her famous throughout the galaxy as the voice of reason and peace. The Sol monitoring report shows the same results as always, and all human colonies remain in deep hibernation with no signs of activity or change, and their automated systems continue to function perfectly, maintaining the sleeping population in their stasis pods while the plague that forced them into this eternal sleep continues to keep them locked away from the galaxy, and we have detected no communication signals, no ship movements, and no energy signatures that would suggest any humans are awake anywhere in their 13 colony systems. She paused and let her words sink in as they always did, and watched the relief wash over the faces of the council members, because everyone knew what humans had been like before the plague hit them and forced them to choose between death and eternal sleep. And the stories were still told in whispers on worlds across the galaxy about the time when humans walked among the stars and brought chaos wherever they went, and how they fought wars that lasted for decades and conquered planets just because they could, and how their very presence made other species nervous and jumpy and ready to fight. The records show that humans were involved in 70% of all major conflicts during their active period, and they started 40% of those wars themselves. And even when they tried to make peace, they did it in ways that made everyone else uncomfortable, and they negotiated like predators, and explored space like they owned it, and treated other species like obstacles to be moved or resources to be claimed. And the galaxy had never known a moment of true peace while humans were awake and active. Consul Daemon of the Korthax hegemony shifted in his seat, and his large frame made the reinforced chair creak under his weight, and his red eyes glowed with the anger that his species was famous for, and he raised one massive hand to request permission to speak, and when HFY nodded, he stood up to his full height of 3 meters, and his voice boomed across the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. This is madness, and we waste precious resources monitoring empty worlds while living species struggle to find enough raw materials to build their fleets and expand their territories, and the humans have been dead for over 3 centuries, and their planets are full of rare metals and advanced technology that could benefit everyone in this galaxy, and we treat their corpses like they are still dangerous when they are nothing but frozen meat in fancy boxes. The chamber erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs because no one spoke about humans that way in public, and even though they had been asleep for longer than most species had been spacefaring, there was still something about them that made everyone nervous, and the old fears ran deep in the collective memory of the galaxy, and HFY raised her hand for silence and waited until the noise died down. Before she responded, Consul Daemon forgets the classified files that explain why we maintain this protocol, and the Sol system is off limits, not just because we respect the dead, but because we learned long ago that disturbing humans, even in their sleep, can have consequences that no one wants to face, and the automated defense systems around their worlds are still active and still deadly. And the warning beacons still broadcast the same message that Admiral Subin sent out before the last humans went into hibernation. She activated the chamber's main display, and the familiar image of a human woman in military uniform appeared on the massive screen, and her face was stern, and her eyes were cold as winter, and her voice had carried the weight of an entire species when she made the announcement that changed the galaxy forever. And even though the recording was over 300 years old, it still made everyone in the chamber feel uncomfortable and afraid. This is Admiral Subin, speaking for all of humanity, and we have chosen to enter voluntary hibernation, rather than continue to bring conflict and chaos to the galaxy. And we recognize that our nature makes us incompatible with peaceful coexistence, and we will sleep until we can find a way to change what we are, or until the galaxy no longer needs to fear us, and we ask only that you leave us in peace, and do not disturb our rest, because we cannot promise what will happen if you wake us before we are ready. The recording ended, and the chamber fell silent, and Consul Daemon sat down heavily, and his anger seemed to have cooled somewhat, but his eyes still glowed with resentment and frustration, and he muttered something in his native language that the translation systems wisely chose not to interpret, and Haiwan continued with her report as if nothing had happened. The Federation has prospered during the human hibernation period, and we have seen the longest period of peace in galactic history with only minor conflicts that have been resolved through negotiation and mediation, and crime rates have dropped to historic lows. And exploration has continued in a measured and careful way that respects the rights of all species. And we have built a civilization based on cooperation rather than competition, and on wisdom rather than strength. But even as she spoke the words that she had spoken every year for the past 50 years since taking over the Sol monitoring duties, Haiwan felt a chill run down her spine because she had read the classified files that Consul Damon mentioned, and she knew things about humans that would terrify even the bravest warriors in the galaxy. And she knew that the hibernation was not just about keeping humans asleep, but about keeping something else locked away with them. The Korthax had grown powerful during the human sleep, and their empire now spanned dozens of systems, and their fleets were among the largest in the galaxy, and they had built their strength through conquest and intimidation, and they saw the Federation's careful approach to the Sol system as weakness and cowardice, and Consul Daimin had been pushing for years to open human space to salvage operations and resource extraction. After the session ended and the representatives began filing out of the chamber, Consul Damon approached Haiwan, and his massive form cast a shadow over her much smaller frame, and his voice was quiet, but full of menace when he spoke. And she could smell the metallic scent that his species gave off when they were planning violence. You cannot keep guarding ghosts forever, and the Korthax need those resources, and we will not be denied by fear of sleeping humans. And if the Federation lacks the courage to claim what is rightfully ours, then perhaps it is time for stronger species to take control, and the humans have been dead for centuries, and it is time to stop pretending they will ever wake up. Haiwan looked up at him, and her voice was steady despite the fear she felt growing in her chest, and she spoke the words that she hoped would make him reconsider, but feared would only make him more determined to do something that could not be undone. Consul Damon, the classified files contain information that would change your mind about disturbing human space, and I can arrange for you to review them if you will submit to the proper security clearance procedures and see for yourself why the Sol system must remain off limits until the humans choose to wake themselves. But Daimon had already turned away and was walking toward the exit, and his heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber like a countdown to disaster. And Haiwan watched him go and felt the weight of 3 centuries of peace pressing down on her shoulders like a burden she could no longer carry. And she wondered if the time of sleeping giants was finally coming to an end. Captain Jinho guided his stealth ship through the outer edge of the Kepler 442b system, and watched the long-range scanners paint a picture of a world that should have been dead, but somehow still pulsed with life and energy, and the readings made no sense because this was supposed to be a tomb world where humans had been sleeping for over 3 centuries, but the atmospheric processors were still running and the orbital stations were still maintaining perfect geosynchronous positions, and the agricultural zones were still green and growing. His crew of 12 Korthax warriors shifted nervously in their seats because they had all heard the stories about humans and what they could do when they were awake and angry, but Consul Damon had assured them that the humans were all dead, or might as well be, and that this mission was nothing more than a simple salvage operation to collect rare earth metals and advanced technology that was being wasted on corpses who would never need it again. The ship's sensors detected massive cities spread across 3 continents, and all of them were dark, except for the soft glow of maintenance lights and emergency systems, and the power grid was still running at 40% capacity, which was enough to maintain basic life support and environmental controls, but not enough to suggest that anyone was actually living down there and using the facilities for their intended purpose. Jinho brought his ship down through the atmosphere and chose a landing site near the largest industrial complex on the northern continent, and the buildings were huge and made of materials that his scanners could not identify, and the construction style was both beautiful and somehow threatening in a way that made his crew members check their weapons and armor, even though they were facing no obvious danger. They landed in a cargo bay that was large enough to hold 20 ships the size of theirs, and the massive doors had opened automatically when they approached and sealed again once they were inside, and the artificial gravity activated to match their ship's environment, and Jin-Ho wondered what kind of species built facilities that could accommodate visitors they had never met and might never see. The air outside was breathable and the temperature was comfortable, and there were no signs of radiation or chemical contamination. And Jin-Ho led his team through corridors that were wide enough for a battalion to march through, and the walls were covered with displays that showed information in languages they could not read, but the images were clear enough to understand, and they showed production schedules and resource allocation charts and maintenance logs that indicated everything was still running according to plan. They found the first stasis facility 3 levels down, and it was a vast chamber that stretched beyond the range of their lights and filled with thousands of pods arranged in perfect rows, and each pod contained a human in what looked like peaceful sleep, and the life support readings showed that every single one of them was healthy and stable and dreaming whatever dreams humans had during their long hibernation. Jin-Ho's team moved deeper into the complex and found mining equipment that was more advanced than anything in the Korthax military, and manufacturing systems that could produce materials they had never seen before, and computer networks that were still processing data and running simulations and updating databases, as if the humans might wake up tomorrow and want to know what had happened while they were sleeping. The rare earth deposits were exactly where Consul Diamond said they would be, and the extraction was going smoothly until one of the warriors got greedy and decided to take some of the power couplings that fed the main hibernation facility. And the coupling was connected to more systems than anyone realized. And when it came loose, the emergency protocols activated and alarms began sounding throughout the complex. Doctor So Young felt the tingling sensation that meant her stasis pod was beginning the wake-up sequence, and her mind slowly climbed out of the deep, dreamless sleep that had held her for longer than she could remember. And as consciousness returned, she became aware that something was wrong, because the wake-up was happening too early, and the emergency lights were flashing in patterns that meant danger. She was the chief medical officer for the Kepler 442b colony, and she had volunteered to be among the first to enter hibernation and one of the last to wake up, so she could monitor the health of the other colonists during the transition period, and her pod was equipped with special sensors that let her check on the other stasis chambers even while she was sleeping. The readings that flooded her mind as her neural implants came back online told her that several thousand colonists were being awakened by emergency protocols, and that someone had damaged the power grid, and that there were non-human life signs moving through the industrial sectors, and she realized with a growing sense of alarm that the worst-case scenario that everyone had feared for 3 centuries was finally happening. She forced her body to move despite the lingering effects of the hibernation drugs and climbed out of her pod and activated her personal communicator and sent out a general alert to all the other medical staff who were being awakened, and told them to check on their assigned colonists and to prepare for the possibility that they might need to defend themselves against hostile aliens. The first thing she did after getting dressed was to access the security cameras and see exactly what they were dealing with, and the images that came up on her screen made her blood run cold because the intruders were Korthax warriors, and everyone in the galaxy knew what that meant, and she had read the classified reports about what the Korthax did to species they considered inferior or useful. She could see that the Korthax were stealing advanced technology and rare metals, and they had already loaded several containers onto their ship, and they were moving through the complex like they owned it, and treating the sleeping humans like obstacles to be avoided rather than people who deserved respect and protection. So Young made her way to the main communication center and activated systems that had been dormant for over 3 centuries, and she sent a message that would change everything and wake up forces that had been sleeping longer than the colonists themselves. And as she typed the words, she wondered if she was making the right choice, or if she was about to bring down consequences that no one in the galaxy was prepared to face. The quantum entanglement communication network was something that most species thought was just a legend or a theoretical possibility. But humans had built it before they went to sleep, and it connected all 13 colonies to Earth through instantaneous communication links that could not be detected or intercepted by anyone who did not know they existed. Her message was simple and direct and contained the code words that would activate protocols that had been waiting for over 3 centuries to be used, and she sent it to Admiral Minho on Earth, and she knew that once the message was sent, there would be no way to take it back, and no way to stop what would happen next. Package compromised and Sleepers awakening, and Protocol 7 is now active. The message flashed across space faster than light and reached Earth in less than a second and triggered automated systems that began sending activation codes to every human colony and military installation and research facility that had been hidden throughout the galaxy and waiting for the day when someone would finally break the one rule that had kept the peace for 3 centuries. So Young watched the quantum signature pulse out from the communication array, and she knew that every deep space monitoring station in the galaxy would detect it and wonder what it meant. And within hours, everyone would know that humanity was talking again. After 3 centuries of silence, and she wondered if the galaxy was ready for what that would mean. The other colonists who had been awakened were gathering in the main assembly hall, and they looked confused and frightened and angry, and they wanted to know why they had been woken up early and what was happening to their world. And she would have to tell them that their worst fears had come true, and that aliens had found them and violated their sanctuary. But first, she had one more message to send. And this one went to Captain Jinho's ship, and it was broadcast on all frequencies so that his entire crew would hear it and understand that everything had changed, and that they were no longer stealing from sleeping humans, but from people who were very much awake and very much aware of what was being done to them. This is Dr. So Young speaking for the Kepler 442b colony, and you have 15 minutes to return everything you have stolen and leave our system, or we will consider your presence an act of war and respond accordingly. And I suggest you move quickly because the people you thought were helpless are about to remind you why the galaxy was afraid of us in the first place. Jinho received the message as he was loading the last container of rare metals onto his ship, and he felt his blood turn to ice because he had never heard a human voice before. But there was something in the tone that made every predator instinct in his body scream danger, and he ordered his crew to abandon everything and prepare for immediate departure. But it was already too late because the quantum signature had been detected, and the galaxy knew that humanity was waking up, and that 3 centuries of peace and quiet were about to come to an end. Admiral Minho sat in his command chair 7 kilometers beneath the surface of Earth's Pacific Ocean, and watched the quantum signature pulse across his screens like the heartbeat of a galaxy that was about to learn the truth about humanity's 300-year sleep, and he had been waiting for this moment since the day the last human colony entered hibernation, and he had never slept and never stopped preparing for the day when someone would finally break the one rule that kept the peace. The message from Dr. So Young confirmed what he had always known would happen eventually, because the galaxy was full of species who saw weakness where they should have seen wisdom, and who mistook patience for helplessness, and who could not understand that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to use your strength until the moment when you have no other choice. He activated the master control panel that had been dark for over 3 centuries and watched as status lights began flickering to life throughout the vast command center that stretched for kilometers in every direction, and the screens showed him the current status of every human installation in the galaxy, and confirmed that the preparations he had spent 3 centuries making were ready to be put into action. The hibernation had been a lie from the very beginning, and humanity had never been infected by any plague, and they had never been forced to choose between death and eternal sleep. And the real reason they had withdrawn from galactic society was much more terrifying than any disease, because they had finally understood what they had become, and what their presence did to the rest of the galaxy. Humans were apex predators in a galaxy full of prey species, and everywhere they went they brought conflict and competition and change, and even when they tried to be peaceful, their very nature made other species nervous and defensive and ready to fight, and the galaxy could never truly be at peace while humans were awake and active and involved in galactic affairs. But the hibernation had given them time to study every species in the galaxy, and to understand their strengths and weaknesses and their fears and desires, and their military capabilities and their economic systems and their political structures. And after 3 centuries of observation, humanity knew more about their galactic neighbors than those neighbors knew about themselves. The automated shipyards, hidden beneath Earth's oceans, had been building for 3 centuries, and they had produced a fleet that was larger and more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and the ships were hidden in dimensions that most species did not even know existed, and they were powered by technologies that had been developed during the long years of apparent sleep. Minho sent the activation codes to all 13 human colonies, and watched as the status boards lit up with confirmations that the sleepers were awakening according to plan and that defensive systems were coming online, and that the careful preparations of 3 centuries were finally being revealed to a galaxy that thought humans were helpless and harmless. Research scientist Yunji received her activation code while she was supposedly sleeping in a stasis pod on Mars, and she climbed out of the pod that had never actually been keeping her in hibernation and activated the defensive systems that had been hidden beneath the planet's surface for over 300 years, and the weapons platforms that rose from the red soil were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Engineer Tae Hyun got his code while he was working in the mining facilities on Europa that the galaxy thought were abandoned, and he brought online the massive industrial complexes that had been extracting resources from Jupiter's moons and building materials and components that would be needed for the next phase of humanity's plan commander. Young Sik powered up the Sol system's perimeter defenses and watched as the cloaking fields that had hidden humanity's true military strength for 3 centuries began to fade away and reveal the truth about what humans had been doing while the galaxy thought they were sleeping peacefully in their pods. The Federation's monitoring stations that had been watching human space for 3 centuries suddenly detected energy readings that broke their instruments and quantum signatures that should have been impossible, and gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of massive structures that had somehow escaped detection for over 300 years. Ambassador Hai Wan was in her office on Centauri Prime when her personal communicator received a message on a frequency that she had not heard used in over 3 centuries, and the voice that spoke to her was calm and familiar, and somehow more frightening than any threat she had ever heard, because she recognized the tone of someone who held all the cards and was finally ready to play them. "This is Admiral Minho speaking to Ambassador Haiwan, and I believe we need to discuss the current situation and the unfortunate incident that has occurred in the Kepler system, and I think it would be best if we spoke directly rather than through official channels, because what I am about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about human hibernation." Haiwan felt her hands shaking as she activated the secure communication. Blinked and saw the face of the man who had become a legend during the last days of human activity in the galaxy, and who was supposed to have been sleeping for over 3 centuries, but who looked exactly the same as he had when he disappeared into the Sol system. All those years ago, Admiral Minho, the entire galaxy believed that humanity was in hibernation due to a plague, and that you were all sleeping until you could find a cure. And we have been monitoring your systems for 3 centuries, and there has been no sign of any human activity or communication. And the quantum signature we just detected was the first human transmission in over 300 years. Minho smiled, and it was the kind of smile that predators gave when they were about to reveal how completely they had outsmarted their prey, and his voice was patient and educational, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child who should have understood it from the beginning. "Ambassador Haiwan, there was never any plague, and humanity was never helpless, and we have been awake and active for every single day of the past 3 centuries, and we have been watching and learning and preparing, and the hibernation was a strategic choice that allowed us to study the galaxy without interference, and to develop technologies and capabilities that we will now begin to demonstrate." The screens in Haiwan's office lit up with data streams that showed human activity throughout the galaxy and energy signatures that had been masked by technologies beyond Federation understanding and ship movements that had been invisible to all their sensors and monitoring systems, and she realized that humanity had been active in every corner of the galaxy while everyone thought they were sleeping. The moon's far side revealed weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets and asteroid mining operations that had been extracting resources for 3 centuries, and research facilities that had been developing technologies that made Federation science look primitive and outdated, and communication networks that connected every human installation through quantum entanglement links that operated faster than light. Haiwan watched the displays with growing horror and understanding as she realized that the peaceful galaxy she had helped to maintain was built on a foundation of human restraint rather than human weakness, and that humanity had been choosing not to act rather than being unable to act, and that 3 centuries of peace had only been possible because humans had decided to let other species believe they were helpless. "Admiral Minho, you are telling me that humanity has been deceiving the entire galaxy for 3 centuries, and that you have been building military capabilities and studying our weaknesses while we thought you were in hibernation, and that everything we believed about human withdrawal from galactic affairs was a lie, designed to make us feel safe while you prepared for some kind of return. Minho nodded, and his expression became more serious as he began to explain the real reason behind humanity's strategic withdrawal from galactic society, and why they had chosen to let other species believe they were victims of a plague rather than predators who had chosen to remove themselves from the food chain until they could find a better way to exist. Humanity realized that we were the problem, and that our very nature brought conflict and instability to the galaxy, and we withdrew not because we were weak but because we were too strong, and our presence made peaceful coexistence impossible, and we needed time to study the galaxy and understand how to change our approach to interspecies relations. But now that someone has broken the hibernation protocol and awakened our colonies, we are faced with a choice, and we can either return to the galaxy as we were before and bring back the chaos and conflict that marked our previous involvement, or we can reveal what we have learned during our time of observation and offer the galaxy something completely different. The screens showed images of massive construction projects at the galactic core and energy signatures that suggested technologies beyond anything the Federation had ever encountered, and star charts that mapped galaxies beyond the Milky Way. And Haiwan began to understand that humanity's plans were larger and more ambitious than anyone could have imagined. We have spent 3 centuries preparing, not for conquest but for exodus, and we have built something at the galactic core that will change everything. And we are offering the galaxy a choice between stagnation. The emergency session of the Galactic Federation Council was unlike anything that had been seen in over 3 centuries, and representatives from 200 worlds sat in shocked silence as the reports came in from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, and every single one confirmed the same impossible truth, that humanity was not only awake, but had apparently been active and building and preparing while everyone thought they were helplessly sleeping in their stasis pods. Dr. G1 appeared on every communication screen in the galaxy simultaneously, and her broadcast reached every inhabited world and every space station and every ship that was capable of receiving transmissions, and her voice was calm and confident, and somehow reassuring despite the fact that she was delivering news that would change everything. The galaxy thought it knew about humans and their place in the universe. Citizens of the galaxy, this is Dr. G1 speaking on behalf of humanity, and I am broadcasting from Earth to correct some misunderstandings about our species and our activities during the past 3 centuries, and to share with you discoveries that we have made during our time of observation and study, and to offer you choices that will determine the future of all intelligent life in this galaxy. The Federation Council chamber erupted in panicked voices and angry demands for explanations, and Consul Diamond stood up, and his massive frame trembled with rage as he realized that he had been manipulated and deceived, and that his salvage mission had triggered something that was far beyond his ability to control or understand. Dr. G1 continued her broadcast as if she could not hear the chaos in the council chamber, and her words reached every corner of the galaxy and forced every intelligent being to confront truths that they had been avoiding for centuries, while they enjoyed the false peace that humanity's absence had provided. During our 3 centuries of apparent hibernation, we have been studying galactic civilization, and we have discovered a pattern that threatens the long-term survival of all intelligent species, and that pattern is stagnation, disguised as stability, and comfort, disguised as progress, and safety disguised as growth. And we have learned that the galaxy is not becoming more advanced or more enlightened, but is slowly dying from lack of challenge and risk. The peaceful period that followed our withdrawal was not a sign of galactic maturity but a symptom of galactic decline. And when we removed ourselves as a source of conflict and competition, the other species did not grow stronger or wiser, but became more comfortable and risk-averse and bureaucratic, and innovation slowed, and exploration stopped, and entire civilizations began to fade into quiet irrelevance. She activated displays that showed statistical analyses of galactic development over the past 3 centuries, and the data was undeniable, and showed that technological advancement had slowed to a crawl, and that exploration of new worlds had almost stopped, and that most species were now focused on maintaining what they had, rather than seeking new possibilities and challenges. The Federation had become a caretaker, organization that managed decline rather than encouraged growth, and the member species had become content with their assigned roles and territories, and they no longer dreamed of greatness or sought to push the boundaries of what was possible, and the galaxy was becoming a closed system that was slowly running down like a clock that was winding to a stop engineer. Yunwu joined the broadcast from a location that appeared to be deep in space near the galactic core, and behind him, massive structures were visible that defied easy categorization and seemed to bend space and time in ways that should have been impossible, and his voice carried the excitement of someone who had spent centuries working on a project that was finally ready to be revealed. We have been building something at the galactic core, and it is not a weapon or a fortress or a monument to human power, but a gateway that will allow any species that chooses to leave this galaxy and explore entirely new ones where different challenges and possibilities await, and where the patterns of stagnation that have trapped us here will not apply. The Federation representatives stared at the images in disbelief because the structures near the galactic core were clearly artificial and had been built on a scale that suggested technologies far beyond anything that existed in their databases. And the energy readings were unlike anything they had ever seen, and the gravitational effects were reshaping local space in ways that seemed to violate known physics. Consul Daemin could no longer contain his rage, and he stood up and pointed at the display screens, and his voice boomed across the chamber like the sound of mountains falling, and his words carried the fury of a predator species that had suddenly discovered it was not at the top of the food chain. This is all lies and manipulation, and humans are trying to trick us into believing they are our saviors when they are really planning to conquer us, and they have been building weapons while we thought they were sleeping. And now they want us to follow them into unknown galaxies where they can control us without interference from anyone who might oppose them. But Dr. Jiwan had anticipated his objections, and her response came immediately and was supported by data that had been collected during 3 centuries of careful observation and analysis. And her words cut through his anger like a blade cutting through silk, and left him with no reasonable argument to make. Consul Daemon represents exactly the kind of thinking that has kept the galaxy trapped in patterns of fear and competition and suspicion. And his species, the Korthax, have grown powerful during our absence, but they have also become an example of what happens when a species chooses conquest over growth and domination, over exploration. And they now control dozens of systems, but they have learned nothing new and discovered nothing important. And their empire is built on the weakness of others rather than their own strength. The screens showed detailed analyses of Korthax expansion patterns and their methods of control, and the data revealed that they had indeed grown powerful, but had done so by taking what others had built rather than creating anything new, and their military might was impressive. But their technological and cultural development had actually declined during their period of expansion. Every species in the galaxy faced the same choice, and they could continue to exist within the comfortable boundaries they had established and maintain the stable, predictable existence that the Federation provided, or they could choose to grow and explore and face new challenges that would force them to become more than they currently were. Dr. So Young appeared on the screens from the Kepler colony, where the awakening had begun, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen the galaxy's reaction to humanity's return and understood what it meant for the future of all intelligent species. The incident at our colony has shown us that the galaxy is not ready for humanity to return as we were before, and we cannot simply resume our old role as a source of conflict and competition, because that would only recreate the problems that forced us to withdraw in the first place, and we need a different approach that offers growth without chaos and challenge, without destruction. She gestured toward displays that showed the portal construction at the galactic core, and explained that humanity had spent 3 centuries developing technologies that would allow mass migration to other galaxies, and that they were offering to share those technologies with any species that was ready to leave the comfort and safety of the Milky Way and explore new frontiers. The portal will be completed within days, and the first human expedition will depart for the Andromeda Galaxy, where we will establish new colonies and face new challenges and learn new things, and any species that chooses to join us will be welcome to participate in an adventure that will test the limits of what intelligent life can achieve. But Consul Daemin was not finished, and he ordered his fleets to mobilize, and his voice carried across Korthak space as he declared that humanity's return was a threat that had to be stopped before it could destabilize the careful balance of power that had developed during their absence. The humans think they can manipulate us with promises of exploration and growth, but they are the same predators they always were, and they want to lead us into unknown dangers where they will have every advantage, and we will be helpless and dependent on their technology and their guidance, and I will not allow my people to be enslaved by creatures who have been planning our downfall for 3 centuries. His war fleets began moving toward the Sol system, and other Korthak's commanders received orders to prepare for a military campaign that would either destroy humanity before they could complete their plans or force them to surrender and submit to Korthak's authority. And Control Admiral Minho watched the fleet movements from his command center beneath Earth's oceans, and he was not surprised because he had predicted that someone would choose violence over growth and conflict over cooperation, and he had spent 3 centuries preparing for exactly this scenario. The Korthaks were about to learn what humanity had become during their long apparent sleep, and they would discover that 3 centuries of preparation had produced capabilities that no military force in the galaxy could match, and that the choice to attack Earth would be the last mistake that Consul Damon would ever make. The Korthak's war fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and Consul Damon stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the displays that showed him a single human ship waiting for them, like a tiny insect that had decided to challenge a swarm of predators, and he laughed because he had expected humanity to meet his fleet with massive defenses and overwhelming firepower. But instead they had sent one small vessel that barely registered on his sensors. Admiral Minho sat alone in his ship and watched the Korthak's fleet spread out in attack formation, and he counted 200 vessels, including battlecruisers and destroyers and support ships. And he knew that Consul Damon believed he held every advantage, and that the humans were defenseless and helpless and about to be crushed by superior numbers and firepower. The communication channel opened, and Consul Damon's voice filled the space between the fleets with arrogance and certainty, and his words carried the confidence of a predator who believed he was about to claim easy prey and establish his dominance over the species that had once made the galaxy tremble with fear. Surrender immediately and submit to Korthak's authority, and we will allow your species to continue existing under our protection and guidance, and if you resist, we will bombard your worlds until nothing remains but ash and radiation, and your 3 centuries of hiding and scheming will end with the extinction of every human in the galaxy. Minho activated his own communication system, and his voice was calm and patient and somehow more threatening than all of Consul Damon's bluster and rage, and his words carried the weight of 3 centuries of preparation and planning and absolute confidence in the outcome of what was about to happen. Consul Damon, you have made a fundamental error in your calculations, and you believe that we have been sleeping while you built your strength, but you have failed to consider what we might have been building while you were focused on conquest and expansion. And you are about to learn why the galaxy was afraid of us before we chose to remove ourselves from galactic affairs. Minho's ship released a cloud of objects that looked like space dust but began to move toward the Korthak's fleet with purpose and intelligence, and within minutes they had reached the enemy vessels and begun to interface with their systems in ways that the Korthak's engineers could not understand or prevent. The nanobots did not destroy or disable the Korthak's technology, but instead began to upgrade and enhance it, and suddenly the enemy ships found their weapons operating at efficiency levels that should have been impossible, and their shields became stronger than the materials they were made from, and their computers began displaying star charts for galaxies that their species had never seen. Dr. So Young appeared as a hologram on Consul Damon's bridge, and her presence filled the command center with an authority that made the Korthak's warriors step back and lower their weapons because they could sense that they were in the presence of something far more dangerous than they had understood. Consul Damon, you came here expecting to find sleeping humans who could be easily conquered, but instead, you have found something completely different, and we are not returning to the galaxy to dominate or control, but to offer every species a choice between remaining trapped in patterns of stagnation or joining us in an adventure that will test the limits of what intelligent life can achieve. She gestured toward the displays that now showed the completed portal at the galactic core and the massive structures that surrounded it and the energy readings that indicated it was ready to open doorways to galaxies beyond anything the Korthax had ever imagined, and her voice carried the excitement of someone who was about to embark on the greatest journey in the history of intelligent life. The portal is complete, and humanity is preparing to leave this galaxy and explore the Andromeda system, where new challenges and opportunities await, and we are offering the same choice to every species that is ready to grow beyond the comfortable limitations that have kept them trapped in mediocrity and fear. Ambassador Hewan's voice joined the conversation from the Federation Council chambers, where representatives from 200 worlds were watching the confrontation and trying to understand what was happening and what it would mean for the future of galactic civilization. Admiral Minho, the Federation needs to understand what you are proposing and whether this portal technology represents a threat to our security or an opportunity for growth and expansion. And we need to know if humanity's return means the end of the peaceful period that has lasted for 3 centuries. Minho smiled and activated displays that showed the true scope of humanity's plans and the technologies they had developed during their apparent hibernation, and the choices they were offering to every intelligent species in the galaxy. Ambassador Hyawan Humanity is not returning to resume our old role as a source of conflict and chaos, and we have learned that the galaxy cannot handle our presence in the traditional sense. And so we are offering something completely different, and we are leaving, but we are inviting others to come with us and discover what lies beyond the boundaries of this closed system. The portal at the galactic core began to activate, and space itself seemed to bend and twist, as energies beyond Federation understanding opened doorways to distant galaxies, where new frontiers awaited, and the first human ships began their journey toward adventures that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe. Consul Damon watched from his flagship as thousands of human vessels emerged from hidden locations throughout the galaxy and began moving toward the portal, and he realized that he had not been facing a military force but an entire civilization that was preparing to leave everything familiar behind and explore territories that no one had ever seen. His own ships were now operating at levels of efficiency that his engineers could not explain, and his weapons could destroy planets, and his shields could withstand the explosion of stars, and his computers were showing him technologies that could reshape matter at the molecular level. And he understood that humanity had given him capabilities that his species could never have developed on their own. Dr. Jiwan appeared on communication screens throughout the galaxy, and her words reached every inhabited world and every space station and offered every intelligent being the same choice that was being offered to the Korthax, and her voice carried the promise of growth and challenge and discovery. The portal will remain open for anyone who chooses to join us, and we are not demanding allegiance or submission, but only a willingness to face new challenges and grow beyond current limitations. And the species that choose to remain in this galaxy will be left in peace to continue their comfortable existence. She paused and looked directly at Consul Damon, and her words were specifically directed at him and his people, and her tone carried both challenge and invitation. The Korthax have built a powerful empire through conquest and domination, but they have also trapped themselves in patterns that prevent real growth, and we are offering them the chance to use their strength for exploration instead of oppression, and to discover what their species might become if they chose cooperation over competition. Damon stood on his bridge and watched as ship after ship from dozens of different species began moving toward the galactic core and joining the human exodus, and he realized that he faced a choice between maintaining his empire in a galaxy that was being abandoned by its most dynamic inhabitants, or leaving everything he had built behind and taking his people on a journey into the unknown. The final message came from Admiral Minho, and it was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, and offered one last invitation to join humanity in their exploration of new frontiers. The universe is vast, and we have only begun to explore its possibilities, and the door will always remain open for those who are ready to grow and change and discover what lies beyond the comfortable boundaries of the known galaxy. And we hope that someday every intelligent species will choose adventure over safety and growth over stagnation. The portal stabilized, and the first human ships disappeared into the swirling energies that connected the Milky Way to distant galaxies, and behind them came vessels from dozens of species that had chosen exploration over comfort and challenge over security. Dr. Yunji sent the final transmission. Back to the galaxy they were leaving behind, and her words carried both farewell and promise. We are beginning the greatest adventure in the history of intelligent life, and we will send messages back to tell you what we discover, and the portal will remain here for anyone who decides they are ready to join us. And remember that the universe rewards those who are brave enough to reach for something greater than what they already have. Consul Damon watched the last ships disappear through the portal, and he looked at his upgraded fleet and his enhanced technology, and he realized that humanity's greatest victory was not in conquering the galaxy, but in showing other species that there were alternatives to the patterns that had trapped them all in mediocrity and fear. The portal continued to pulse with energy and possibilities, and somewhere in the distance the Andromeda galaxy waited for explorers who were ready to discover what lay beyond the comfortable boundaries of everything they had known.